All right, guys. I'm going to just post this video here on that one slide that we didn't get covered today, so we just don't have to worry about it on Monday. Turn my video off. Pull up my screen. Talk fractures here. Okay, so fracture is described as a break in the continuity of a bone, and they are named according to severity, shape, position of the fracture line, or even just the position it first described them. That's what's listed down here in table 6.1. What the fracture is, key feature here is that it's an acute injury, which means that it happens, you fall and you break your arm, or you get an accident and you break a leg, something like that. Okay? It's a sudden type injury, whereas a stress fracture is described as a chronic injury. And stress fracture is described as a series of microscopic fissures in the bone that forms without any evidence of injury to other tissues. And so, you may fracture without visibly seeing it broken. Stress fractures are typically a result of repeated strenuous activities, things like running, jumping, dancing. So, gymnasts, dancers, track athletes, very susceptible to stress fractures. We're consistently pounding, your feet on the pavement, as I say, body weight, pressing down on things like your feet and ankles and lower leg bones. Those are where you typically see stress fractures. What's listed here in our table 6.1 is not any of the stress fracture stuff. It's a normal type fracture, okay, an acute fracture, as I mentioned. First type, what we call an open, typically probably called more a compound fracture, is one where the bone is broken and protrudes out of the skin. So obviously you wouldn't need an x-ray to say, hey, you've got a broken bone. You can see the bone sticking out. Very gruesome, very, very severe medical emergency, because obviously person can be bleeding, could be very severe amount of blood. That type of injury is not only tough on the person, but people who see it as well. Typically, x-ray is needed for what we call a close or simple fracture, which would be one that doesn't break the skin, which is what all of these, the rest of these are all listed as, are a form of. The next type, comminuted, another very bad fracture. You can see the picture. Kind of looks like the bone's just been exploded into many pieces. So the pieces at the site of impact, small bone fragments slide between the two main bone fragments. Probably going to need a surgical procedure, kind of like Humpty Dumpty, put them back together again. Green stick, key with a green stick, occurs only in children. That's an important phrase. I would highlight, underline that. Is one, and I'll zoom in. Well, that kind of happens only in kids because their bones aren't as strong and ossified, so not as hard as ours are as adults. What happens is like what happens if you try to break a green stick, which is like a stick that's still connected to a tree. It's still very bendy. You might be able to, splinter it on one side, but the bone won't break clean through like you would see a more like brittle branch breaking. The next one is an impacted fracture, where the fractured bone is forcibly driven into the interior of the other. So very, very bad, and probably another surgical procedure to fix. The last two, Potts and Colles fractures, probably named after a doctor that discovered them or described them. Very common ankle injury is Potts fracture, where the distal end of the lateral leg bone, so the fibula, is broken down there towards the ankle. While we also see, ligamental damage on the medial side. And then a Colles fracture, another fairly common fracture at the towards the wrist, not wrist bones, but forearm bones, specifically the radius, which is your lateral thumb side bone, is displaced posteriorly. So you can see, and you kind of see a bump on the back of your forearm, kind of like where your watch face would be. As we already went through slide 9, we don't have to go through that. So that wraps us up with our bone tissue lecture. So